So, Sir Peter Rigby, Craig Marsh, Head of the College of Business at the University of Lincoln. It's great to meet you, and thank you for joining us today. Well, our conversation is about leadership principally, but it'd be very good if you could start just by introducing yourself, if you wouldn't mind, and talking a bit about your background.
Okay, so I'm a UK-based entrepreneur and businessman. I started in business not having gone to university. I had intended to make a career in the Royal Air Force, had a scholarship to Cranwell. My father lost his health, lost his job, and I decided it was inappropriate to do that. So I was fortunate enough to join a graduate entry scheme into a large American IT group, even though I hadn't been to university. And I learned the basics of information technology, mainframe computing in those days, learned to program, design systems. Eventually, I ended up selling mainframe computers for a large American corporation, moved on to another one. But I'd always wanted to do my own thing. And I had saved £2,000, and I decided, having got a mortgage as well and a couple of kids, that it was time to have a go. Of course, that was the early days of IT, and it was very much a sunrise industry. And from there, I built up a large IT group. It's the largest privately owned IT group in Europe. And I then built on top of that other interests. We now have a group with 6 pillars to it, comprising 130 companies, covering aviation, airports, hotels, property development, private equity. It is now the 10th largest privately owned business in the UK, trading in 20 countries outside of the UK.
Fantastic. And given your experience, we can't possibly do justice to all of that experience in 20 minutes, but we'll have a go, and perhaps very interested in pulling out some of your insights on our theme pillar. So I'd like to start, if I may, on this subject of the millennial generation that we hear so much written about, and as being a generation that has quite a different value set and attitude to work than perhaps previous generations. So perhaps we'll just share with you some of your insights into this generation and your businesses and what you see happening with that generation.
Yes. So first to say, I'm very keen to bring young people into the business. It's the lifeblood, or future lifeblood, of any of the businesses that we operate, in whatever sector we're operating in. I think today, young people are somewhat different than they were 10, 20, 30 years ago, in the sense that, first of all, their expectations in life are such that they want to achieve success as quickly as possible. Right. Indeed, overnight if possible. And outside of obvious industries like the entertainment industry, even in business now, and with technology particularly, there's an expectation that if you have got the ability to design something, that instantly somebody's going to want to pay a fortune for it, and you're going to make a success and move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Life, in my experience, isn't quite like that. You have to work hard and have something special to offer if you are going to achieve real success. So you have to have a career plan, I think, rather than just expect it's all going to happen for you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily see young people these days having planned their career. They go to university, often they're longer in education than perhaps they need to be, and sometimes they come out without actually knowing what they want to do. My view is that you need goals in life. You need to set goalposts where you want to achieve. Yeah. And it definitely helps if you know what sort of profession or area of activity that you really want to perform in.
So some of those things haven't changed. So even though this millennial generation seems to be having a different approach to success, those basic principles about career and having objectives and goals, those haven't changed in your view from the previous generation.
They shouldn't have changed. But I do see people, particularly people who are coming out of university or further education with an average qualification, mm-hmm. not really knowing what they wanted to do. Or they have sometimes got a qualification that really doesn't really count for an awful lot. Mm-hmm. And then, in the workplace, have they been prepared for the workplace would be one basic question. Yeah. The other aspect I would highlight is that today everybody, and particularly young people, are computer literate. And they have an expectation that their goals can be achieved very quickly through the broadcast of their contacts or their abilities or whatever. I think that's quite dangerous, actually.
Is it?
I think they are also putting themselves in a very exposed position by putting all that information out there. And that is an issue which people will learn about, and every day one reads about the implications of that in terms of how people are compromised in life.
Yes, indeed, and that familiarity with communication media, social media that they've grown up with, that seems to be putting more of a this achievement pressure on them, doesn't it? They seem to want to be able to broadcast the fact that they've achieved something rapidly. It seems to be that communication media that's created that value set. I mean, that's one of the things I've heard. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is it's about me type approach as well. And life isn't quite like that.
Right.
Real achievement comes from having put a lot of effort in, having done something that's, if not unique, very meaningful. And as I say, that doesn't happen overnight.
No. And in terms of the organisations, the businesses that you run, Peter, do you find that businesses having to adjust with that value set, or is your approach more that the millennial generation almost have to learn themselves how to be successful in business and therefore change that orientation? I mean, how are you seeing that?
I think that there is an expectation that things will change to accommodate them. On information systems, for example. And of course, that doesn't happen overnight. There's basically a transformational change that's required in business to deliver current or future systems. And they have a part to play in that. I'll give you an example. Last night I presented some awards that we do in medicine to it's a scientific program I run. And I was talking to somebody who was complaining about the lack of completeness of a system. And they were 20 years of age, and they were receiving some form of insulin. And the idea was that AI would help them in some form to be monitored. And I said, well, that's great. You're a prime example of beneficiary of this. Why don't you influence it? Don't criticize it. Contribute.
Right. So what does that say? Just pull that out, that example. It's a really interesting example. If you pull that out a little bit, what would that tell you about a particular attitude or to work? I mean, it almost seems like a sense of entitlement. Is that right? Or as opposed to actually sort of looking at a problem?
An expectation that somebody's going to fix it for me.
Yeah, but not me.
Yeah, but I've got to make a contribution to society, to business, to medicine, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? And how would you see, given your experience, would you see organisations having to evolve to accommodate those sorts of values, or are sort of the fundamentals of business never going to change, and therefore they will need to adapt?
I think business has to evolve to do that. I think it has to recognise innovators, people who want to contribute. Sometimes people come to the surface through the most difficult routes. Yeah. And it is important to recognise achievers and to develop them, not at the expense of others necessarily, but to give people a career path which helps them to realise their capabilities. Right. I think that's incumbent on an organisation.
To do that. And you say to give them a career path, is that something that the individual almost, because I think one of the things you were saying a little earlier is that individuals almost need to own that career path themselves and have their own goals and so on. Is that right? I mean,
they should do. I think those people who are as complete as that are not necessarily great in number in my experience. Right. You have to help people. Yeah. And having a mentor, having a partner, having somebody you admire, if you're working in an environment where there are good leaders, then you can learn a lot.
You can learn a lot from them. Yeah, very much so. Yeah. One of the things that's also said about this generation is they don't have the same degree of loyalty potentially to organisations as they might, as perhaps you and I might have had in the past. Is that also something that you're seeing?
I think it is. It is. I mean, in the IT industry, the rate of turnover of people is high. Yeah. They are given a skill, that skill is possibly in rare skill, it's in demand, so they can significantly increase their salary. I mean, another observation, of course, is that the current generations have very high expectations of salary and benefits, and that's fueled by, things like the banking industry, where they take mathematics graduates into a bank on a salary which is probably maybe as much as twice the average for somebody with a similar qualification.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So that's fascinating. And you've already started to touch a little bit on the aspect of leadership in this kind of context, and perhaps I can just explore that a little bit more with you, because as a very senior leader yourself and as an entrepreneur, obviously you've got a lot of experience in that. But perhaps if I can start with leadership more generally, Peter, and whether you see any changes in your experience of the way leadership has to be done in organisations, almost perhaps to accommodate some of those different changes. Are you seeing that, or you think that is this something that stays the same regardless?
I think some aspects don't change. I think personally, I admire people, men or women, who lead from the front, who've got practical experience of what they are doing. They've probably come up the hard way, as it were, whether that's through an academic route and then going into business, or whether they ended up in business without going through necessarily any great formal education. They're learning on the job, as it were, and experience. I've learned, I've been running my own businesses for more than 40 years, and the sort of thing that happens is that you manage to accommodate issues, problems, opportunities much more easily as you gain in experience. Things that used to scare me when I was 30 don't scare me now or over the years, because I've got the experience managing a business through a recession, for example, maintaining a program of investment despite downturns and difficulties, turning a company around. In all those situations, you have to demonstrate leadership. And that leadership is commitment to the business or the product or the project that you're involved with, to the people inside that project. And that pays dividends, I think. It doesn't guarantee loyalty.
Right.
And I think in business you have to come to terms with the fact that you will lose some people, maybe for all the wrong reasons. Maybe the last person that you thought would leave. There are, lots of surprises. But, I think this is all part of this having a trajectory, having a path to follow, and having the courage or determination to follow that.
And that's one of the things that if you were looking for bringing a leader in or developing a new leader, that would be one of the characteristics that you would be looking for, is it, out of a leader, is having this almost personal path and having this personal commitment and engagement.
I think so. It depends on the nature of the requirement you have for that leader. If it's sorting out a very difficult company, you may want somebody who is very forceful, who is very direct, who doesn't take prisoners, as it were. On the other hand, if they're picking up a mature business that is in okay shape, then somebody who is going to take the thing apart is absolutely the wrong person.
Right.
So in all of this, in evaluating somebody as a leader, you are also, I think, looking at them as a human being.
First and foremost, almost.
Yes,
by the sound of it.
Indeed.
And you mentioned that, coming back to what you were talking about, that your learning journey as a leader, and you talked about you've developed this. I know this is my word. It almost sounds like resilience in some ways that you've developed over the period of your experience. Is that something, if you were talking to young leaders these days, is that something that you think leaders could learn a little more quickly, being able to deal with those complex problems as you described?
Absolutely, 100%. It's I would use the word stamina.
Stamina. Okay, right.
The ability to carry on, to sort an issue rather than just walk away from it and leave it, or pass it on to somebody else. I think, if you are a real leader of something, you are ultimately responsible for that. You may report to stakeholders or board of directors, but fundamentally, you are tasked, you are employed to deliver a result. And I think real leaders do take that responsibility. They don't pass it down the line.
It's almost like a feeling of ownership over the task. That is a feeling, isn't it? It's not.
Yes.
It's not something you can kind of give to someone. It's not a theoretical thing.
No, indeed, it's a real thing.
It's a real engagement with a task or an issue. And you think that's something that new leaders can perhaps learn perhaps quicker, because you had to learn through experience by the sound of it. And is that something that people can engage with quicker?
I think it is. I mean, and you see this through life. I mean, if you take a very complex degree course, then there are many times you want to give up on it. Because the amount of information you've got to absorb, the number of exams these days you've got to sit for anything, incredible determination required to come through all of that and expect a good result.
Very much so, very much so. And we were discussing the millennial generation a few minutes ago, Peter, and given some of the things that that you were sharing your insights into that, how confident are you about that generation in terms of providing a new leadership, a new generation of leaders?
I think there are great young people out there, no question, at all walks of life, in all backgrounds. I do think in many respects these days it is very difficult for people who are from a working class environment, if I can use that phrase. They have to work exceptionally hard to lift themselves out of the environment that they've been brought up in. Much less so people who've come from a moderately wealthy background or a privileged background. And I know some excellent men and women who've come from the most poor circumstances, and they've had that determination and drive and desire to distance themselves from the perceived route that they would go through life.
Almost forged through hardship in some ways.
Yes, and it's almost an accelerator. It's a goal to get through that.
Yeah, I see. And if I may, just something that you have touched on already is your own personal philosophy of leadership that has been forged through hard experiences.